Hello, my name is Michelle, and you're listening to Profit is a Choice. On the podcast with me today is Renee Biery. She is a luxury interior designer and a podcast host. Her podcast is Only Girl on the Jobsite, and she's also a construction expert. We're going to have an amazing conversation about adding in construction management into your design services. Many of you are probably doing that already, and just really some of the pitfalls, some of the things to watch out for, pricing, all the fun stuff that trips us up, but that we love to get right. And Renee is an expert in those things. So I invite you to enjoy the conversation with us. Every day, empowered entrepreneurs are taking ownership of their company financial health and enjoying the rewards of reduced stress and more creativity. With my background as a financial software developer, owner of multiple businesses in the interior design industry, educator, and speaker, I coach women in the interior design industry to increase their profits, regain ownership of their bottom line, and to have fun again in their business. Welcome to Profit is a Choice. Hey, Renee, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. We have already had such a long, fun conversation pre-recording that it's like, I'm sure we're still going to find plenty of things to talk about now that we're on camera and on audio.
Absolutely. There's a lot to cover.
Lots to cover. So, Renee, as we get started, I always like to, if you've listened to the podcast, I'm sure you have, I'd like to invite people to share a little bit of your story, because I think we all have so many things in common, but it can be easily brushed over. Like, I know you do construction management, and they might say, oh, I don't do construction. But there are pieces and parts of everything that you do that somebody else does that they can see themselves kind of in your story somewhere. So start and tell us just a little bit about your career path to get you where you are today.
Sure. And yes, I agree. It's a very interconnected industry. So I was anomaly in my peer group. I knew in high school that I wanted to be an interior designer. And so that was the only focus. I wanted to go to the New York School of Interior Design, get my undergraduate degree. They have a BFA program. And my parents said, no. They said, I'm not going to pay for art school. You'll change your mind. What do you know? You're 18. So I went and got an undergraduate degree and chose a degree I liked, which happened to be sociology, and ended up at the New York School of Interior Design for my graduate work and have been practicing ever since. So that was 30 years ago this year. I do construction management because I love it, and it's because I've always done it. So the firms I started working with in New York happened to do that. It was not an intentionality necessarily. It was just what most of them were doing. So in other words, our client would buy the apartment above them, below them, left or right of them. Then we'd need to blow through. And okay, now you've got 2 kitchens, 2 pantries, 2 powder rooms, and you had to make it all work. And in an apartment building, you can't move a lot of waste stacks or any waste stacks. And so it was really challenging. There's fire doors you have to take into consideration. So there was a lot of really intricate work that had to go into what a client would say is, oh, I'm simply, combining apartments, So that was really the beginning of my love for construction management. And I then sought out other firms that did that same work. But all along, and part of my passion is in the decorating side, right? And any construction project ends with, well, now we got to furnish it, whether it's a new space or a renovated space. Okay. So I'm fortunate. I am able to I usually do about 60-40 construction projects to decorating. Some years can shift to 70-30. Some years it's, 40-60. But I've been able to do consistent construction work for the past 30 years. It also led me into a short stint in commercial work. So I was doing hospitals, banks, law firms, and I learned a whole lot about systems and more of a programmatic perspective. And I also learned that I don't enjoy it. Right. There wasn't as much joy. Basically, if we hit the budget and, the presentation was you know, nothing outrageous. You're standing in a room or presenting in a room of maybe 10 guys, and they're all like, yeah, that looks good, go. And it wasn't that, I don't want to say, it wasn't a great challenge. And while I understand why some designers prefer commercial work because there is less drama, I only lasted about 2 years in commercial work, but I do use those skills to this day.
It's interesting. I mentioned to you, and I know my podcast listeners know both my sons are in commercial construction. And what's so interesting about it is I think it's the emotional tie. Like if you were look at what the challenge is, there's still plenty of challenges in commercial work. And I know that you reckon, I mean, I know that you know that and you're agreeing with me. The challenge is the emotional connection with the work. And when we do residential, there is a huge emotional component because we're in someone's home. We're in their private living space. It is a different relationship with the furnishings. Commercial, it's outside of us and it's outside of them. Like they may have really strong ideas, but the emotional, they're not living there. They're not building their life around that in the same way. And so there is a disconnect there. It very much is, it's more of a black and white presentation. This is what it is. The thought that keeps coming into my brain is kind of like a League of Their Own or A League of Her Own, where Tom Hanks yells at her, "There's no crying in baseball." It's kind of like that in commercial
Yeah.
design. There's really just not a lot of emotion and crying. I mean, the emotion's probably more irritation, domination, anger,
Yes.
frustration. You have emotion, but it's not that same thing. And on the residential side, there are tears and there's excitement. And I'm not talking bad tears. It's just a whole different thing. So
And
I
it can
can
be both.
totally appreciate that. Yeah, right. I totally appreciate that. Um, so I'm curious, did you find, I know you do both and you enjoy both. Did you find that there was something about let me back up and ask it this way. When you thought as that young girl, I want to go into design, were you thinking about the construction management piece or were you thinking more about the decorating, beautiful, more of the form versus the function? Were you thinking more of along those lines?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I did not recognize any desire, don't remember thinking about it. Now, that said, I've always been very handy. I always joke, and even with the contractors, when I'm pitching in to help, I said my father didn't have sons. And so I had to pitch in and learn. Things. For instance, I went to college with a toolbox made by my father. I was the most popular girl on the dorm because I had the hammer that they needed for their posters or what have you. And so there was always that interest.
Yeah.
Um, and when I went to school at the time, the school was run by architects, which at the time I thought nothing of that. Now I thought that was really unusual. Like the dean of students was an architect. And so again, I'm old enough where we were taught more drafting than CAD work.
Mhm.
And my drafting teacher was really pivotal in my in really opening my eyes to that world. She was so cool. She told us that she drafted ink on linen for the city of New York in the early stages of her career. Now we were at the very end of her
Wow.
career. Can you imagine? Like I am so uptight about my drawings that
I would
I
want to
can't.
frame that. That feels like a piece of art to me.
I mean, talk about no room for error.
No.
Um, so
And
she
talk about
was
precision because ink
exactly.
on linen and the way that it can run and spread out like it does on certain types of paper, you know what I mean, that are very fibery. Like all I can think of is you had to have a tiny pen and you had to be so precise. Like there
Yes.
is no room to mess that up.
No room for error. Plus, what she didn't tell us, and there's a group of four of us from design school that are still best friends, and we all had Joan as a teacher, and we all talked about it later. We're like, was she the only woman? That was not a female
No, it
populated
was not.
industry.
Mm-mm.
And so she would tell us in class, I am teaching you how to draw things you cannot legally seal. You will never be able to legally present this and pull permits from, like an HVAC system. We were drawing all of that. And at the time, I mean, I was, what, 22? I was like, okay, never questioned it, never thought it. I was like, well, the teacher says to do this, ergo, I'll do it. Um, She would say, I want you to be able to sit at a table of men and know what they're talking about, add value to their conversation, and be respected. And again, at 22, I was like, okay, sounds good. Had I known then those insane pearls of wisdom and how that would be a through line of my career. I we have always said that Joan is really, because all four of us have always done construction management in one form or another. It's really amazing. I also just put it all together. My grandfather was an engineer. He built plants for the DuPont company, and I would pore over his drawings in the basement. I thought they were fascinating, but it never occurred to me that those two would merge.
Yeah, the seeds that were planted. It
Yeah,
even makes me think with Joan, it was like in the 80s before a woman could even get credit on her own or start a business bank account. I think women first got the opportunity to have a bank account without the signature of a man in the 70s, but a business bank account they could not have until the mid 80s. So when she's talking about women were not allowed to do those things, she's not wrong. I
okay.
go, there was a, oh gosh, what was the name? Is it The Chemist? Or something like that. It was a show, I think it was like on Netflix, and it was a woman who, it was an adaptation of a book or something, but she was like a chemistry major, and they would not let women be chemists. And she was the one that was finding all of these things. And they show these pictures of her like in a room, and it's all these men, and she's there. And the only way to get her ideas up through the top was to tell a man and have the man tell it. Like it had to be, and then the papers are written and her name was left off of them, just all kinds of things that we see. It's interesting because I kind of feel like I'm pushing that same kind of ball up the hill, but for women with financial understanding, right?
Absolutely.
That same,
Absolutely.
we weren't invited to those tables. We weren't taught these things the same way. You and I are similar in age, and it was almost unheard of. And so,
Correct.
it was just a very, women could be in the banking industry, but they were usually like the tellers or maybe a loan officer, but not in the upper echelons in a lot of cases. It was, and some were, but it was very few and far between in a time
Absolutely.
like that. So we are so blessed to be today where women have so many opportunities to be equal with men in our understanding and in our learning and the ways that we show up. And so there also comes up with a lot of responsibility. We better know what we're doing. I
Yes.
feel kind of like the weight is heavier on us sometimes to come and to show. I've also seen studies where it says, I thought this was interesting. Men will tell you they've done it and are great at it before they have fully accomplished it. Women usually wait till they fully accomplished it, and then they'll tell you if you ask, but they're not usually as fast to say I'm great at that, where a guy would say it a little bit faster, even if the woman has more experience than the guy does. Just fascinating.
Absolutely.
From a psychology and sociology, that's
Yes.
fascinating to me. I'd be
Yes.
like, I got it. And we're over here thinking, I need to have had it 14 times with a written process and I need to have it buttoned up. And they're like, they've never done it before, but they're just, I think it's the same thing that makes them jump off the monkey bars faster than girls in a lot of cases. It's that, right? That confidence that they just kind of have in some cases that we work hard to get. So it's nice to see it showing up.
We work very hard to get it. And I think our industry is lagging behind a lot of the other industries as far as seen as equals on construction projects. I wish I could tell you the why, but it doesn't seem to have caught up in the same
I
way as
agree.
other industries.
Yep. I have a client that had um, a male employee. And when she would go to some of these construction meetings, even though she's the one with all the degrees, all the information, doing the majority of all the work, she would take him with her because she had kind of been stonewalled and not listened to. And she would let him kind of say that's almost like the reverse, right? And here he was, not credentialed, not degreed, none of the things that she had, but she finally was like, at some point, I can sit here and demand all day, or we can just move on. And she's had to find ways to work around that, where in some instances, in a good old boy network, she's got to get the guy to say what she needs him to say. And they now, well, her work looks a little different now, but they would prep before they went into those meetings
Sure.
so that they could come joint and say things to just get it done so they could move on and do the work.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
I was like,
Not
are you
surprised at
kidding
all.
me? We're in the 2020s and this is still going on, but it's true. It
Yes.
really, but again, here's the thing. Women should not be afraid of this
No.
because the majority of the designers that I work with, and not everyone, but the majority of them do some version of renovation or new construction, which means they are on that job site and they are looking at the plans and they're having these discussions with the builders and with the architects. And I can tell you, and you've probably seen this borne out in your work as well, personally, and in your coaching and in your mentorship, if you can show up and do the job really well, you will gain such huge respect by your peer group. And now they won't think of doing a job without you, because I'm seeing a lot of my designers, they're being called by the architect, they're being called by the builder. We don't want to do this if you're not in it. Like, they are recommending them back because them really showing up and doing that job well without a bunch of tears and drama and stuff that kind of get assigned to us, even if that's not the case, right? Just because of gender. If
Absolutely.
they just show up and just be professional and do what they're hired to do, it creates a beautiful synergistic relationship, where they want them there and they see the value. They understand. Once they prove the value, it becomes a non-negotiable.
100%. And I think that's where designers can trip themselves up unintentionally. They see themselves as the outsider, right? As the only girl on the job site. And it's very easy to just stay in that role. And okay, well, here I am. I'm going to suffer through another meeting, and they might talk down to me. They might ignore me. They might just simply dismiss me altogether. And the problem is, you will create that, right? If you treat
Right,
yourself as another, they will continue to treat you as another because, yes, automatically they do see you as another because you are. And
right.
so I constantly encourage designers, you are a team member. You are of the same team. The only one in charge of that project is the client paying for it. All the rest of us we have identical roles in different subjects, right? We
That's
have
right.
come from a different profession, all with the same goal. We want that client's project from A to B. That's it.
Right.
And when designers go in and feel very insecure, I'm the same way. You tend to get a little brash, right? You're
Right.
coming off trying to overcompensate for your
Yep.
insecurities. And unfortunately, that feeds the stereotype, like you mentioned, right? Oh, she's being
It's
bitchy,
just
or oh,
blood in
she's
the
being
water.
pushy.
That's right. That's right.
Exactly. And you're unfortunately
Then it
handing
becomes
them,
self-fulfilling, right?
exactly. You're
Yeah.
handing them reasons. Oh,
Yeah.
remember how she talked to us last week? Yeah, I'm not going to listen to her anymore.
Yeah.
And so it seems so simple, but it is absolutely pivotal in the relationship when you become mentally a teammate as opposed to someone who believes they're in charge. Even if I do the drawings, I am not in charge. Even if I built the team, I am not in charge. I am a team member and we're coordinating together. It's like colleagues at work. And so when, I talked to someone who came out of the financial industry, I said, you have a boss, you have people that are under you, and then you have colleagues. I said, you treat a contractor like you treat your colleagues. You're collaborating together. You're asking their opinions. You're, by the way, taking their opinions and their concerns and their suggestions. It's not an insult. It's not a put down. And she's like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. But we're so mired in our, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. I shouldn't be here. They're
Right.
treating me like I
Right.
shouldn't be here. That you can't turn that off, and therefore you're missing out on. So what you mentioned was what I call industry partners, and your industry partners are the means to fill your pipeline.
That's
If you
right.
are sitting there relying only on your clients, both present and past, that is a very small group of people, and you are discounting the fact that every contractor and architect, every single one of their clients could be a client of yours.
That's right.
Every single one.
What's interesting is when we show up in a space, um, already personally aware that we deserve to be in the space, we don't feel like we have something to prove. And so just coming into the space, I also like to think about it as being on the same side of the table where you talked about we're colleagues. If we look at this trying to get from A to B, if I'm on the same side of the table with the architect and the builder and the contractors, and we're all working together to get to B, then it mentally puts me in the space that when they're saying something, they're not coming at me. They're trying to sharpen me or sharpen the project or sharpen the outcome, right? We're working together in cohort, in concert to make this happen. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody on the team is going to act
Receive
that
it.
way as well. That's right. But I do think not having the chip on the shoulder, but also not being apologetic for having an idea and an opinion and for sharing it. So almost like a calm, quiet confidence that I'm here. With my being here and my speaking up has nothing to do with your idea of whether I should or should not be here. Like I've had to work on that over my 50 plus years, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm here because I have a right to be here, and it is not predicated on your belief system for me to be here. Right? I just
Agreed.
am.
And
And
it doesn't
usually
end.
if you disarm it by asking for input, what do you think about this? Hey, have you done something similar? What did you do? What was the outcome? What would you change? And if we start inviting other people into the conversation, like you said, instead of looking at it, us and them, as long as we know what we're doing and they know what they're doing, it's going to work out. 9 times out of 10, it's going to work out just fine.
And not only will it just work out, you will learn.
Yeah.
So when I designed something, I had a designer tell me, she said, well, I created this built in, and the guy said he just couldn't build it. I said, well, what do you mean he couldn't build it? Like, do we not have wood in the world? Do we, yeah, what
What
exactly
does
did he
that
say?
mean? Yes.
And she said, well, he said he couldn't do it the way I designed it. And I said, okay, what was his suggestion? She goes, oh, I didn't ask. I was so upset, I just left. And I said, okay, so you now need to go back. And it's okay. It's funny. We all think that we need to be an expert on day one, but that contractor, that carpenter had a first day, a first month, a first year, a first decade, perhaps, where he was also learning. And by the way, I'm 30 years in, I'm still learning.
That's right.
And
We
so
learn on every project. Don't you learn
every
something on
single
every project?
project.
Yep. Even
And
if it's don't do that.
if I didn't, I probably would have left by now, right? Like
Yeah.
it keeps
How
me coming
boring.
back. How boring to do the same thing in this rote manner over and over. And so she did. She went back to the guy and she said, okay, this is my design intent. How can we build it? And beautiful. They had this lovely conversation. She walked away with a whole lot more information so that on that next project, guess what? She's going to design it that way
That's
and
right.
it
She's going
won't
to
be an
take that
issue.
into account. It's even
Exactly.
true, like even sometimes when we do custom window treatments, we'll have, if the designer can show up when they're trying to either put up the hardware and do certain things, right? Or even the workroom, see those things, then we can design around it to make it happen. It happens to all of us. It's so funny why we put so much pressure on ourselves to know all the answers. I tell my clients all the time, I'm like, if you get asked a question that you just don't know the answer to, instead of saying, oh my gosh, I'm clueless, like, don't do that. I said, my answer was always something along the lines of, wow, this is really interesting. There are probably 2 or 3 ways this can be solved. What I'm going to do is go research which is the best application for this. Because the truth of
Absolutely.
the matter is there usually is 2 or 3 ways that we can do
Yes.
anything. And so what you're doing is you're saying, I don't have it right now, but my brain is already going in a couple of paths for how we can get to the end result that we need. I'm going to go research what's going to fit the time, the budget, the expertise, whatever we have resources available, and then I'll come back to you. Honestly, that's all people want. They don't, and if they want that, you've got to answer me and you got to answer me now. That's probably not a client we want to work with anyway. And that's a big red
Correct.
flag because now they're bullying me to answer something that I'm not prepared to answer. And so if we can just um, have confidence in that we don't have to know everything on the spot.
Correct.
But what we have is we have resources that allow us to go out and to find that answer and then come back and to present it with a confidence and a budget and a timeline and the resources needed. Then that kind
Sure.
of it brings the pressure down, right?
Absolutely.
For others and for us.
Well, and think about it on a specific job site. I mean, you might have 5 or 6 different trades. So the electrician is an expert in electricity. He might know some carpentry, framing, things like that, but that's it. He might know a little about plumbing, but that's it. His expertise is in one trade. But yet, we're expected to come on a site and be an expert in electrical work, plumbing work, framing, windows, doors, floors. I mean, it's
And then all the
absurd.
furnishings and all the things that go
Right.
around it.
It is
Yeah.
simply absurd to think that we could be, and frankly, you shouldn't present yourself as I'm an expert in all these things because it's not humanly possible. But
Mm-mm.
what I find is designers are also in those moments afraid to admit I don't know something. So to your point, we want to immediately resolve it, right? We want the pain to go away. We want the embarrassment to go away. And to your point, okay, let me go look into it because you're right. There's always something, there's always more than one way to do it. And over time, those same ways, those evolve as well. Like
That's right.
we are now in the world of
Or
LED
new
lighting.
product, right? Or right,
Right,
new product that you're like, oh, I didn't even know I could do that. Oh, you mean I don't even need to plug that in? I can have
right,
something that doesn't have to plug in, and everybody's cutting cords on Amazon everywhere and putting a
right.
light bulb in there. Like we
But you
didn't
know what
have
else
that.
I do? And I don't do it I don't do it in a condescending way, but I will walk up to an electrician and say, what are you doing? I am so fascinated. I've not seen this before. Everybody likes to talk about what they're confident in. And I challenge any designer listening to the next job site you go on to. Walk up to the trade that you really don't know what they're doing or really why. And obviously you don't ask it in an adversarial way like, what are you doing? You just say, you know what? I find this
Yeah,
fascinating.
I'm
Could you tell
curious.
me what are you doing? And what should I be looking out for on my next project?
That's right.
I guarantee you they will all stop or maybe continue what they're doing, but tell you what they're doing. And in the process, you are establishing a rapport, you're building know, like, and trust, and you're learning. And it's just
And
a
respect.
win win. Of
There's a
course,
huge respect there
huge respect.
because you asked instead of making an assumption, right? Or acted
Absolutely.
like you know. They can tell if you don't really know what you're talking about, and you
Of
talk about it as
course.
if you do. It's all new.
Of course.
Let me
Of
ask you this,
course.
Renee. Why do you think, now, not after that conversation, we wouldn't scare off the world, not meant to do so, but
No.
why do you think that some designers are really fearful of this? Because the majority of them, whether it's a whole home build or whether it's a renovation, I would say, at least of the designers I work with, I don't know any that only do furnishings. I don't know any. Back in the day, I worked with some that just did design plans or just did furnishings, but the majority of designers that I work with and know today, at least that have been in their business for a few years, right? It might change. There's some type of construction management in every single one of them. But
Good.
but they're so fearful of going into that, right?
But they're
Why?
already in it. See, that's
That's
the
my
thing.
point. That's
They're
right.
already in it and they aren't taking the credit for it, so to speak. So when I started my podcast, it was a COVID baby, and it was directed to homeowners because I
Tell
had
us the name of your podcast, just while
uh,
we're talking about.
only girl on the job site because
Okay.
that is how I feel. And it started during COVID because I live 5 miles south of Pennsylvania. And during COVID, Pennsylvania shut down construction. So I had ongoing projects that I was not physically allowed to go to. And this was pre Zoom, so that we were FaceTiming and it was crazy, right? But those contractors were sneaking in and still working. So the homeowner was trying to manage it. And it wasn't going well, to say the least. And she's a very difficult client. And at one point, she got extremely frustrated. And she said, I just don't understand why there can't be a manual. There's just got to be a manual on how I can do this. And essentially hung up the phone. And we have since parted ways because I don't like working with people like that. But that stuck with me. And the whole rest of the day, I thought, yeah, sure, there's a manual. Now, it's not going to take into consideration the nuances of every project, but
Right.
just like any construction project, there is an order of events. And that just never left me. And so I started the podcast, Only Girl on the Job Site, during COVID to talk to homeowners about how they could make their way through their own projects, because any designer listening has had a friend or a neighbor tell them ad nauseum about all of the disasters they had, about how horrible their projects were, blah blah blah, right? And you get kind of tired of hearing about it. And so designers started showing up within weeks. And I just assumed they were checking me out, like, oh, what's she up to? And then the emails came and the DMs came. I'm on this site, Renee. I am in over my head. What do I do about this? And at first I thought it was a fluke, and then they just kept coming. And I realized, again, because my girlfriends from design school and I have always done this. I don't know I'm not in touch with a lot of designers. This again was pre-Zoom, or Zoom was a baby at that point. And I realized, like, holy cow, there are a lot of designers on these projects that don't know what they're doing, or worse, they know what they're doing and they aren't giving themselves the credit.
That's right.
And so I immediately, frankly, I literally just stopped talking to homeowners. And the next episode was all for designers. Because, I mean, obviously, if I've stayed in this business for 30 years, I truly love this industry. I want it to be seen as a higher level professional or profession
Yes.
than it is. We were
Yes.
promised in the 90s, it's coming, it's coming.
Yes.
Yeah, I have it all. I have my NCIDQ. I have my, top design school degree with honors. Yeah, it's still not coming.
Right.
So I'm not
We've
waiting
got to
for it.
create it ourselves.
I'm trying to help it along myself.
Yes, same thing.
And so again, like I mentioned earlier, I started in the industry working for others. So all of my mistakes were absorbed by someone else's company. And at the time, I obviously knew it, because I was like, oh God, am I going to be in trouble? But I didn't get fired. But most designers don't have that luxury. And so
When it's our own business, we're absorbing the mistakes.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, on construction projects, they can be really big numbers.
Yes.
And so I really do believe that what I started hearing was, I got dragged onto this kitchen. My client really wanted me to do her bathroom. And so they actually weren't even recognizing this skill in themselves. Their clients were, which is amazing, right?
Yes. Yes.
But then they still aren't buying into it themselves. They aren't sort of taking that label, so to speak, and making it a part of their own. And I joke with designers, but I'm not kidding. When I started changing how I introduced myself anywhere, I don't mean with professionals, but with social things, whether it's at school or a cocktail party or a holiday event, they'd say, oh, what do you do for a living? And of course, I would say, I'm an interior designer. And more often than not, the conversation would be, oh, that sounds so fun. Or my cousin is an interior designer. Or my mom has a great sense of color. And you're sitting there forced to go, isn't that, oh, wonderful. Oh, that's exciting for them. And you're going, okay, this is done. And the conversation almost always ended. Now years ago, I switched to, I'm an interior designer and I specialize in construction management. Boom. I mean, it's almost kind of funny at this point. The look on their eyes when they're like, wait, what'd you say? What? Oh, what does that mean? Wait, what do you do? Now, is that person going to hire me? No. But I do feel that we need to be broadcasting what we're already doing.
That's right.
And we're not. And so when I started the podcast, I was sure there was no reason to. I was sure someone else was talking about it. My husband was like, really, Renee? Yeah, there's got to be someone else out there. I looked and I looked and I looked. I'm like, where? And people do talk about it, but not solely. And I thought, why? Why are we not talking about something that we're all doing?
We're really reducing. I use it as kind of the word just, right? That just is a diminisher. I'm just a designer. No, you're not. I see this. I'll tell you another place I see this, which is very interesting to me. And that is where women or men who are selling custom window treatments, and they're selling them in the home to the homeowner, and they don't see themselves as a window treatment designer or a window treatment specialist. But that's what they're doing. And
Yeah.
a lot of them will say, oh, well, I go home and make them too. Okay, awesome. So now you're a drapery workroom and a window treatment specialist selling retail and designing what it's going to be. But by not owning it, they don't charge for it.
Correct.
Right? And so what you don't own, you don't charge. That's why my tagline is what you own, you can change. Well, what
Yes,
you own, you can charge for
a
is the
hundred
same
percent.
thing. So if we're not fully owning what we're bringing to the table, I can promise you our pricing and our profitability will reflect that every single time because I see
Every
the P&Ls to
single
prove it.
time. A woman DM'd me the other day. She said, I just found your podcast and I wanted to run something by you because I think I'm doing this work. I think I've been doing it for a while and I'm not charging for it. And then she listed out what she was doing and my heart wept.
Yeah,
She is knee deep with almost 10 years of experience and she's not charging for it.
I
So
know. I
we
see
had
it
a quick
every day.
conversation about that.
Yeah,
Um,
every day I see it, not understanding. I told you before we got on, I listened to one of your podcasts this morning, and it was on pricing and making that really clean scope of work, like down to the nitty gritty scope of work, not just using an estimator or a square foot without really looking at what it stands for. And I told you I was high fiving my husband was like, she's in line with you. I'm like, because I was in the bathroom with the podcast going and he had to listen to it too.
uh,
And he was
poor
like,
guy.
yeah, he's used to it by now. And I said, he's like, she's in line with what you're saying. I'm like, absolutely she is. I said, because we've learned it doesn't take very much to realize flat fees and all that, that's great if you really know what you're doing, but it has got to be so crystal clear. And I loved your whole sorry, not sorry. You do have to keep up with the time. We just have to keep up with the time. And so, honestly, keeping up with time, keeping up with the work we're doing, and recognizing that we're doing it because
Yes.
it's easy to not recognize that we're doing it when we don't list it out. So, I kind of can see or I definitely see how those go together and why we don't price for all of it. If we didn't list it out in detail, we can't recognize that we're doing it because we just do it. And then we're not pricing for it because we didn't recognize it and we didn't charge for it. So the more you can detail out what you do, how you do it, your job description, just write your job description. That will be enough for you to realize what you do. Write down every single thing that you do and then look at it. Your job description and the title of your job description is going to change. I will tell you that the majority of the women that I talk to and men as well, we do better to introduce ourselves as a business owner who focuses on design because design is a very small part of what we do. We miss out the whole fact that we're running a company, that we're CEO, that we are visionary. Like that has a role to play as well, right? We are not just anything. I've
Yeah.
gotten to where I'm like, I'm a founder and CEO of multiple companies, and this is what we do. And because it's a broader understanding of the space that I am taking up because of the things that I've already done, right?
Right. And I think as far as pricing, it goes again back to the confidence. Even those who know they know that they should be charging or they already are charging, they aren't charging what they believe they're worth because they're uncertain of their worth. And
Right.
so when the designers were listening to the podcast, emailing me, it really just morphed into a course because again, just like the homeowners, I can create a a guidebook, right? That takes you literally from marketing yourself in the first place all the way through, taking the photographs, thanking the client, and pivoting to the next project. And I did not include pricing when I first launched it to the designers because I was in the throes of evaluating that on my own. And I tell on the podcast, I only talk about what I've done because I can speak from my own experience.
Right.
And I wasn't sure how it was going to come out in the end. I have always, for 22 years, no, 20, well, on my own, I have been for 22 years with my own firm billing hourly. It made sense to me. All the women I worked for in New York billed hourly. It made sense. Time worked, time billed, right? The clients understood it. Everybody just seemed normal. And frankly, back in the day, that was all that was being done.
Correct.
And I would say about 8 or 9 years ago, probably pre-COVID, design friends of mine were beating me up. You got to go to flat fees, Renee. You got to go. And I'm like, nope, I'm comfortable. My clients love it. I'm making good profits. Leave me alone. I just, we don't like change. I didn't really want to take on that. But I was listening to a podcast, and then it was also resonating through your podcast. Well, first of all, let me back up. People say, oh, I didn't go to design school. Guess what? I did not have business classes in my design program. I loved my
Right.
program. I learned so much except how to run a business. And so what I learned was the better I'm getting at my job, the more I'm penalizing myself because I'm much more efficient. I
Right.
have the resources and I'm not charging the
That's
same I
right.
did before to research and find all of those resources. That was what really was I'm not going to lie, a punch in the gut,
Yep,
right?
because your
Because,
only lever is to either go up on the hourly rate
yep,
or to start bundling things together to charge a value price. That's your only option. Or you're
correct.
losing money for gaining knowledge.
So I took about a year of research,
Yep.
and what I found was even more frustrating. And I ditched the idea multiple times because I couldn't find any two designers that were doing flat fees the same way. And I'm sort of a mathematical person. I obviously that's the drafting side of my brain, and I said nope, screw it. I knew it wasn't going to work for me, but I kept kind of massaging it and working it, and then developed this flat fee structure. And so I added that to the course about 6 months ago. And I'll be honest, I held my breath because it isn't a calculator. I don't believe a calculator or square footage is the absolute. Now, do I sometimes use those for checks and balance to get a range? Yes, I absolutely will look back on my historical data and say, okay, well, I did a kitchen that was similar to this, and okay, yeah, so this is working. This worksheet I have is yeah, okay, and it basically makes me feel good about myself. That's
Right.
all it does. But until you know your role and the phases of construction,
And
you
the
will,
client and the
and the
other
client,
and the other
exactly.
colleagues that you're working with. And like
Exactly.
there's so many other
And that's why
variables
those
that go into it.
calculators,
Don't
those
work.
cheat sheets don't work. The
Yep.
complexities of the project are nullified on those calculators.
That's right.
And
We're looking for a fast track though, Renee. I think a lot of people are like,
guilty as charged.
right, same. They're looking for this fast track. And the truth of the matter is we don't need to fast track our pricing
No.
because that's what bites us later. If we would take the same amount of care and attention to put together our own scope of work, our own internal budgets for time and money, not just money, time and money. If we're looking at the raw material that creates pricing and we're doing our work really, really well, and we're adding in for what we do not know, the same way that you add an overage when you're doing tile or doing flooring. We always add in, and it varies. It can be 10%, 15%, 20% based on the product and how you have to get it. I add in 20% every time on a flat fee for what I do not know. Even if I were to quote you hours and say, I think it's going to take, we used to double our hours. Like if I thought something was going to take me 4 hours, I would say it's going to be between 4 and 8 hours because I
Yep.
don't know what I don't know until I open it up. And
Yes.
so, are you okay with 4 to 8 hours? If it's more than that, after we open it up, we will let you know. And so, then what I've done is I've given myself space within my quote to do things. I've said these are the things that are not going to be covered in a flat fee. Custom furniture, that's not going to be covered because I got to go back and forth with the craftsman to do that. I can't build that in unless the flat fee is huge, which could be much larger than I need it to be. So just knowing the mechanics of it, to your point, and taking that year to look and then stress testing it against the hours that it actually takes or the new ways of doing things or the people that you're working with or something, just even driving around New York or Boston and the fees and moving up and having to come up a back elevator. Like there's so much additional that kind of goes into it. $13 a square foot, 24 a square foot is not going to cut it unless you know every single thing. And it was defined with all of those variables already as part of that number. And we don't do that. We just throw a number. We ask around, what is the number that you're charging per square foot? And then we multiply it and we're like, well, I should be able to do it for that because Renee does it for that. So why can I not
Correct.
do it for that?
And I'm in those Facebook groups. I see those questions and I will, grab a piece of paper and do the math. I'm going, oh, they're probably not gonna, oh Lord, I hope they're okay.
Yeah.
And And here's the other argument I make as far as taking the time. And when I am working on a large project, it can be hours. And then I actually will put it aside,
Yep.
clear my
I was going to
head.
say days.
Yep. Come back the next day. And I always change it more, sometimes less, sometimes more. But these projects, I mean, a bathroom renovation, right? A pretty simple bathroom renovation, 12 weeks. So why are you trying to find a calculator on a project that you're investing all that time in? You really want to make sure that at the end of that project, not only is it beautiful, that the client is happy, but that you were paid what you deserved to be paid. And that is subjective, right? And depending on where you are, depending on the years and
Yes.
experience and all sorts of nuances, the complexity, the team, the client. But I also see designers missing the mark in procurements. I have always added procurements into my construction projects. It is not just furniture that I mark up. And I know there are designers right now gasping because they're like, oh, I couldn't possibly. And my biggest pushback is, why not? Like,
Yeah.
and they never have an answer to that. Oh, well, the contractor does that. Why? Well, because he's always done that. Okay. That doesn't mean he has to continue doing it.
Right.
And so the
We've had that
freedom.
discussion a lot in a lot of my coaching groups, and it honestly boils down to having a conversation. Here,
Absolutely.
here, and it may be a split. Here are the things I want
It
to do,
typically
and
is.
here are the things you're going to do. And honestly, even we were talking about it the other day, looking further into where's the biggest liability if it goes wrong.
Yeah,
Because I can take the
absolutely.
liability maybe on a light fixture. Maybe I don't want to take it on plumbing that's behind the wall where the tile's going.
So I
But
am going
you
to
get
add
to
this
start
in.
making some conversations about it.
Now, I will say this as far as liability, and every state, every country
That's
has its
right.
own set of liability concerns. But if I am, so for instance, the contractor purchased the plumbing. The contractor is not the one installing it, the plumber is installing. So the plumber is taking the liability for the installation. So who is taking responsibility for the physical fixture, the actual spout?
That's
So
right.
if it's Kohler, then Kohler is taking the responsibility. It is not Michelle's responsibility that Kohler produced a product that was whatever, defective in some way.
Right. Right.
It is not the contractors. So I know designers get hung up on the liability, but the thing is, it's the same thing as if you are purchasing a light and the light has a defect in it. It is not Michelle's responsibility that for the liability of the light. It is who she purchased it from,
Right.
right? Because if
Yes.
visual comfort made that light,
Right.
visual comfort has to follow through in it.
Right.
And so that's always my pushback to designers. I'm like, you're dealing with liability issues already. You know,
For
the
everything.
sofa
Yeah.
comes in damaged, the rug comes in damaged. You're just changing the product. Now you're talking about a tub spout
Right.
or a tile that came in discolored. But the tile installer takes responsibility for the
For the
installation.
installation. Well, and my point, and I agree with you. My point in all this is it has to be a discussion early because
Absolutely.
they're going to build their pricing and they're going to make up for the profit that they would have made in a different place, but they've got to know in advance of their pricing to the client. If you are not getting every single thing and you're needing, you've split it perhaps, and you've got to make up for whatever it was that you had expected to be profit on this job, you need to know it before you offer your pricing to the client. Just like when I have people that say, I'm going to have a smaller markup on product, they may charge more per hour to balance it out because they're pricing levers that we can move up and down. So just the earlier we have these conversations, the better.
And I will say, just as a practicality standpoint, it's never the same time. I would say if out of 100 projects, I would say 80 of them I was brought in after the contractor was hired and signed off on. So in his contract already existed, tile, but it's always an allowance. That's where you start negotiating.
That's
So
right.
that contractor actually isn't counting on that profit yet because his numbers for an allowance are pathetic. They're just a formula. They never match what a client wants. And so that's where the negotiating
Or
comes
the
in. So
spending
you
habits of the day.
correct. So you unfortunately you don't always see the contractor's contract before you present your pricing.
Right.
That said, I have never been on a job where I haven't done some procurements.
Mm-hmm.
It's typically the allowances I go after because, yet again, I'm the one helping specify that tile. And what I find is even if there is a rub, I'll tell the contractor, hey, he's expecting, by the way, me to go find that tile. He's not doing that with the client. And I'll have the discussion along the way. Hey, we went to the tile store and you know that, $4 a square foot price. Well, we're in stone. We're in natural stone. We're not even close to that. We're going to be probably double that. And I'm going to source it for her. And you sort of throw that out there. And again, it depends on your relationship with the contractor. And you test the water. Oh, fine. You get the resource. I'm going to be doing the purchasing. Oh, okay. Well, in this case, I think I'm going to do the purchasing. It's from a vendor I use specifically. Contractors don't have vendor relationships with everyone you have. And you negotiate. Maybe you split it, maybe you whatever. But that allowance is where you can start targeting because
Right.
unfortunately, you don't always see the contract
That's exactly
before
right.
you present your own pricing. So
That's right.
knowing in advance is something you shouldn't count on,
That's right.
which means can't impact your flat fee. So you, no matter what, want to dial in your flat fee for your time as
That's right.
accurately as humanly possible so that the procurements are additional income.
That's right. We want to live off of the flat fees and the design time, and that the rest of it to me is gravy.
Correct.
Perfect.
Correct.
So, Renee, we could probably talk for 6 more days. I know that we could tell people where they can find you, where you're hanging out these days.
Sure. Well, my podcast, Only Girl on the Job Site, is you can find it on my website, design.com, or on any of the platforms that stream them. And the best way probably is to sign up for our newsletter. I send out a Friday newsletter, basically talking about more of the industry, right? And so there's the podcast on Tuesdays and the newsletter on Fridays. And then there's the course, the Interior Designer's Guide to Construction Management. All the information there can be found on the website as well. It's a really robust 5 module, over 85 lessons, but I promise they're bite sized because I know we are all short on time. And it includes these pricing spreadsheets, pricing lessons on how to take those nuances and really understand how that will impact your pricing on that specific job, how to develop that scope of work. What are you missing? And how to market yourself. Like I said earlier, start telling people.
Yeah.
And that's just step one, and how to build those industry partners that will continue filling your pipeline of work where you almost don't have, I don't want to say never, but you almost don't have to do your own marketing when you have people out there who want you to be on their projects.
That's exactly.
We have a private Facebook group where we all share our highs and lows, as well as questions in between. It's just really become, and as I told you earlier, it's a community that I didn't know and certainly didn't plan for in my thinking in 2024 where we would be. But it's incredible to be able to support designers doing what I love to do.
That's awesome. Well, I look forward to talking to you more and being able to share some work back and forth. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, and I wish you a great day.
Thank you for having me. You as well.
Renee, thank you so much for joining us today on Profit is a Choice. It's true, profit is a choice, and we're choosing to be profitable by owning who we are and what we do, by taking up the space that is ours to take up, by charging what we're worth, and by managing and doing the work effectively and efficiently. And I also want to encourage you, if you are looking at your financials and you're looking at your business and you're thinking, oh my gosh, how am I making money? I don't know what I'm doing or don't know where the money's coming in and out. I would love to help you look at the financial aspect of your business. We have a couple of opportunities to do that. We have our CFO to Go, where we're going to jump in and do a deep dive into all things financial and not only show you what's been happening, but help you set up a plan with budgets and KPIs to move you forward so that there's never a question again about what am I doing and how am I doing it financially. You'll have all those answers. We also have an opportunity in our coaching program. So you can go to our website at scarletthreadconsulting.com and go to the Work With Me page and fill out a form. We would love to talk with you and see how we can support you best. We also can help you on the Matrique side, matriquesolutions.com. That is our software that allows you to keep up with all your financials and have all the answers that you need just with a couple of clicks of your mouse. And so sign up for a demo or sign up for a way for us to help you there. And as always, choose to be profitable because profit doesn't happen by accident. Profit is a Choice is proud to be part of the designnetwork.org, where you can discover more design media reaching creative listeners. Thanks for listening, and stay creative and business minded.